From the headquarters of Tell Us Your English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. Israeli troops have killed at least 44 Palestinians and injured 200 more along the Gaza border on Monday, the same day that the United States officially opened its embassy in Jerusalem. Israeli forces are using drones to drop tear gas shells on demonstrators. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have gathered across the frontier and have intensified their protests against the opening of the embassy. It is the deadliest day for Palestinian protesters since they launched the Great March of Return 2 months ago. Over 70 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli military since March. And the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is now officially open, despite worldwide condemnation. The inauguration ceremony was attended by the daughter of the U.S. President, Ivanka Trump, who is accompanied by her husband, Jared Kushner, who is an advisor to the president. David Friedman has been appointed as the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Many foreign dignitaries were invited to the ceremony, but most European ambassadors opted to boycott the event. Hundreds of Palestinians are already protesting outside the new embassy. In the meantime, President Donald Trump sent this message from the White House.
Exactly 70 years ago, the United States, under President Harry Truman, became the first nation to recognize the State of Israel. Today, we officially open the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. Congratulations. The United States remains fully committed to facilitating a lasting peace agreement, and we continue to support the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites, including at the Temple Mount, also known as Haram al-Sharif.
After the official opening ceremony, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, quote, "We are here and we are here to stay." He thanked the U.S. president and welcomed what he called the world's most powerful country's embassy. He also said the alliance between the two countries is stronger than ever.
Greatest ally, the United States of America. Today, its embassy opened here. This is history. President Trump, by recognizing history, you have made history.
Meanwhile, Jewish demonstrators marched in Washington to protest the U.S. Embassy's move to Jerusalem. Protesters rallied outside the Trump International Hotel in Pennsylvania Avenue. Many of them were wearing yarmulkes, the traditional Jewish cap, and T-shirts that said "Young Jews reject Trump's embassy of occupation." They called for freedom and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians.
Come at the expense of another people.
In Venezuela, members of CARICOM, the Caribbean Pan-African Network, and other leaders from across the region are expected to release a final declaration that ensures persons of African descent can be properly compensated for centuries of enslavement. Last week, Venezuela hosted an international meeting to discuss reparations. The meeting followed President Nicolas Maduro's proposal for an international plan to repair and protect the rights of the African community that were damaged through slavery and colonization. During the meeting, a group was also formed to file complaints on the issue to international courts around the world. And the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, was one of the participants of last week's conference, and he used the opportunity to voice his support for the upcoming presidential election in Venezuela.
I just want to indicate publicly that yesterday I wrote formally to the Secretary General of CARICOM, having spoken to him, for CARICOM to mount an electoral observer mission to be here from the 17th to the 20th to observe the presidential elections. But if for one reason or the other CARICOM is unable to do it, for whatever reason, be assured that I have contacted enough leaders for us to be able to mount a Caribbean electoral observer mission. We do not take instructions from anybody.
Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has said on Twitter that the country's electoral campaign is proceeding peacefully, contrary to the electoral process in other Latin American countries. Arreaza also said that people in his country are mobilizing for democracy and to demand respect from the other governments in the region that have tried to interfere in its internal affairs. And the opposition presidential candidate Henry Falcon has announced that Claudio Fermin will become his vice president if he wins office. On Twitter, Falcon described Fermin as a man committed to Venezuela with an irreproachable reputation. The presidential candidate made this announcement just after holding a campaign rally in the state of Portuguesa. The National Electoral Council is holding yet another audit of the voting system, with just 1 week ahead of the presidential election on May 25th. Our correspondent Ian Bruce has the details from Caracas.
We're outside the warehouse of the CNE, the National Electoral Council in Marichi, on the outskirts of Caracas, where today they're holding another audit or verification of the voting system. This is the 6th of 10 audits carried out before voting day. This one is called the Zero Error or Pre-Dispatch Audit, where they're testing a portion of the machines that will be used on the voting day, 0.5%, 169 machines of the more than 30,000 that will be deployed on for the vote itself on Sunday. And the aim here is to test the sequence from the voting machine, the transmission lines, to the computing center where the votes are added up, to make sure there's absolutely no chance of error between the information that goes into the voting machine and the information, the total votes that comes out at the end. Last week they checked the transmission lines. There are in all 10 audits before the election, more on election day and more after election day. So we'll be bringing you more on this later in the day.
Thank you for that report, Ian Bruce. Now, Venezuelan elections are actually the 20th of May, which is this Sunday. Stay tuned to Tell Us Your English for extensive coverage. In other news now, the National Liberation Army, or ELN, has announced it will cease its military activities for the presidential election in Colombia, which will be on May 27th. The armed group said on Twitter it will hold a ceasefire from May 25th to May 29th so that the people can express their voice under more favorable conditions. The ELN also warned that some of the country's right-wing groups will try to fight against the changes Colombia needs. Colombian Senator Alexander Lopez is demanding the government investigate an attack that he survived in Cali on Friday night. Lopez was reportedly fired upon by 2 unidentified men who were in a dark truck. His office released a statement saying he was healthy and safe. The senator also called for the government to implement guarantees for all social leaders. The United Nations Commission for Human Rights in the country have condemned the attack. The office representative Alberto Bonori is said to be deeply concerned about these events. We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. The killing of two indigenous leaders have sparked protests in Guatemala over the weekend. Luis Arturo Marroquin and Jose Cansol were killed just last week for defending the rights of their communities. Protesters outside the National Palace blamed President Jimmy Morales, and they are demanding justice. They also accused his government of corruption and called for Morales to resign. Demonstrators also highlighted the vulnerable situation of social movements in the country. Last week, the United Nations reported that indigenous people in Guatemala face discrimination, inequality, and racism on a daily basis. In Brazil, a soldier killed a civilian on Saturday evening in a favela in the north of Rio de Janeiro. It is the first victim killed by the army since the military intervention decreed by President Michel Temer last February. According to official sources, the 25-year-old civilian allegedly refused to stop his motorbike for a security checkpoint. One of the soldiers shot him and he died immediately. The news sparked demonstrations in the area with people burning several buses in protest. Since 2010, over 120 human rights defenders have been killed in Honduras. Most of these murders have gone uninvestigated, including those of people promised security by the government. Surviving human rights defenders say they continue to be threatened.
Reports of harassment and persecution of human rights defenders continue in Honduras. They feel unsafe, regardless of government-set safety measures that should help them.
In Bajo Aguan, we have security measures provided by the Inter-American Commission, but the government of Honduras has not been able to establish any real protection.
Human rights defenders are often attacked by the police and the military during protests. This is the main reason why they don't believe the government has any intention of protecting them.
At the moment, it is me and 3 other human rights defenders who are being targeted. We are harassed for defending students who are being imprisoned.
Environmental defenders also say they receive constant threats and that the government has not listened to their concerns.
All the government does is criminalize us and make our situation worse. We are highly vulnerable and our situation is getting worse because of the government's inaction. They simply ignore our demands.
According to many, the issue is a lack of interest by authorities who don't listen to concerns or even investigate targeted killings.
What makes things worse is the non-existence of public policies by Honduras leaders. It's very important to keep human rights defenders safe, but our leaders don't even have the will to do this.
President Juan Orlando Hernández has described human rights organizations as institutions that do more than good, and that they damage the image of the country.
Pope Francis is holding a series of meetings with Chilean bishops to address the sexual abuse scandals that hit the Latin American country. The Holy See said in a statement that the meeting between the Chilean delegation and the pontiff is aimed to discuss, quote, the appropriate changes that could prevent the repetition of reprehensible acts. Pope Francis initially defended the bishops and priests accused of sexually abusing children for decades. But after widespread outrage, he changed his position. He has since met with the victims as well. Thousands of women gathered in the Chilean capital of Santiago over the weekend to protest against sexual violence. Demonstrators marched to the government palace with torches while dancing and singing different slogans. Feminist movements in Chile and across the world are urging for violence against women to end, along with what they call the rape culture. This demonstration is also supporting female students across 15 Chilean universities fighting for gender equality in the education system.
We believe that the violence has crossed every line that we could possibly imagine. Unfortunately, today we are leading a movement which is a social product of all feminist battles.
There should be much stricter laws against rapists, against discrimination for women and any other person.
Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley is in China to strengthen ties between the two nations. His visit will last until Saturday. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said Trinidad and Tobago is China's biggest trading partner among the English-speaking countries in the Caribbean. He also said that China aims at enhancing cooperation in areas like energy, finance, and agriculture. Residents of the Caribbean may be faced with a possible serious outbreak of dengue fever in the region, according to the Caribbean Public Health Agency, also known as CARPHA. CARPHA is urging countries across the region to employ strict measures to adequately stem mosquito breeding. However, the organization has said nationals should, quote, gear up for the possibility of a major outbreak of dengue fever in 2018. Drums and tires are reportedly the main mosquito breeding sources throughout the region. In Colombia, over 600 people have been affected by floods near the Cauca River in the department of Antioquia. The floods were reportedly caused by the Hydro-Tuango hydroelectric project. Authorities reported that 4 bridges were affected and another one collapsed, making it difficult for emergency services to reach the area. Firefighters and members of the Red Cross and the Civil Defense continue to work in the affected area. And the biggest cable car in the world has completed 4 years of operation in Bolivia and has now turned into a self-financing public company.
4 years ago, La Paz got its aerial cable car urban transit system. The Red Line was the first step, and the public transport project now has 6 lines and 20 stations.
The cable car now is quick, safe and clean, so public transport is much better than it used to be.
This service is necessary for every Bolivian.
You can get to many different places by cable car.
Incluso hasta la Plaza Villarroel.
It is an alternative solution to mass transport in La Paz, which is a difficult terrain, with more than 300 rivers flowing across the city, making building a subway impossible.
After 4 years, our cable car network has the record of the biggest number of passengers transported in a single day. The Yellow Line alone moved nearly 85,000 passengers. And after all this time, we can say that this company is one of the few in the world which is totally financially sustainable. It doesn't need any subsidy.
During the 4 years, the first 6 lines transported 125 million passengers, which is 10 times the country's population. President Evo Morales congratulated the success of this public company.
Our company now has been invited to work in different parts of South America. Our company could be giving a service in countries where it never existed before.
President Morales also talked about the national and international campaign working against the image of his administration and to damage the country's economic model.
In spite of the economic and social results we have achieved, there are some people outside and even inside the country that keep attacking our government. They just want our economic model to fail. We need to invest more, and they are opposed to more investment.
The cable car network covers more than 20 miles and is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest line in the world, with the completion of 5 more lines, bringing its number to 11 by 2020. More than $700 million will be invested and the service will cover more than 30 miles.
Telesur, Bolivia.
And with needles and threads, a group of Mexican artists and activists are looking at innovative ways to deliver messages of peace.
Stitch by stitch, they shape fabric letters. Letters that become names or words. These embroidered pieces are much more than a decorative product of labor. For the artist, this is their way of communicating.
We communicate certain messages that have to do with the search for justice, for the preservation of love as our strength, for the defense of human dignity.
Reinterpreting the textile work of other movements in Latin America, groups like Embroidering for Peace touch upon various topics relevant to their communities.
They are stories of people's death, and later, the stories of disappearances. So it's a little different because when people look at the stitching, they think, someone took the time to remember this.
For them, the messages and the memories that the fabric captures are a way to raise their voices.
To recover that expressive force. So when you say you work with embroidery, it takes on a strength that it doesn't have when you talk about other forms.
Meetings with the embroiderers help to reconstruct the social fabric. meetings in schools, homes, and public spaces.
We are all equal when we are embroidering. We share the same rage and express it in peaceful ways, and I think that's better.
The embroidery of different groups and communities since 2011 have become a way society uses creativity to confront and protest the tragedies of femicide and disappearances in Mexico.
We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Catalonia's lawmakers have elected pro-independence leader Quim Torra as the new president. Torra's name was suggested by the deposed leader, Carles Puigdemont. Catalonia has been without a government since December, after the regional election ended in a standoff between the Spanish government and the former leader Puigdemont. Puigdemont is currently in Berlin waiting for German courts to rule on a Spanish request to extradite him on charges of misuse of public funds. Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr is leading Iraq's parliamentary election. The official results will be announced later on Monday. The three main ethnic and religious groups, the majority Shiite Arabs and the minority Sunni Arabs and Kurds, have historically fought for power. The election was held on Saturday. This is the first electoral process since Iraq declared victory over the Islamic State and the fourth since the 2003 US-led toppling of Saddam Hussein. And now let's have a look at some of the other news making headlines from around the world.
A family of 5 in Indonesia have bombed police headquarters in the city of Surabaya. The attack comes a day after another family of 6 launched suicide attacks on Christians attending Sunday services at 3 churches in the same city. The 2 attacks have killed at least 25 people and wounded 40. The government has confirmed children between 8 to 18 years old were used as suicide bombers. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attacks.
I want to urge everyone again. We will fight terrorism, and we will eliminate the root cause of it. I have commanded the police and police chief to stand the ground and do everything to stop these terrorist acts.
Italy's anti-establishment five-star movement has joined far-right party the Northern League. Together, they are expected to present their government program to the president on Monday and name a prime minister. This comes 2 months after the general elections and weeks of unsuccessful talks to bring the political parties to create a coalition. The populist five-star movement had secured the 30% of votes, but not the right-wing alliance of Forza Italia and the Northern League, nor the centre-left Democratic Party could reach an agreement on joining forces. An Ebola outbreak in the town of Bikoro in the Democratic Republic of Congo has killed at least 18 people. Around 1 million inhabitants are at risk of contracting the virus, according to the WHO. The organization, which is trying to contain the outbreak, has said getting aid to the affected area is extremely challenging given its remoteness and lack of infrastructure. A feminine activist staged a pro-breastfeeding protest at the Vatican during Pope Francis' weekly Angelus prayer on Sunday. The member of the feminist group was topless and holding a baby. According to the feminine website, the protest was performed for Mother's Day and was done to defend the rights of mothers to breastfeed in public spaces. The woman was arrested and taken to a police station. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesyourtv.net/English. You should also join us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Tony Gray. Thank you so much for watching.